Does the act of protest have a cost? That depends on where you live. Next on Global Pulse. People in democracies are free to protest against their governments, while in dictatorships, the act of protest is itself a crime. Either way, demonstrations happen in democracies and dictatorships, as last week's news illustrates. France's TV 5 reported on massive demonstrations in Athens, following tragic fires in the Greek countryside.
Everything began peacefully. There were tens of thousands of protesters that gathered in the middle of the Greek capital, voicing their anger against the government of Kostas Karamanlis, accused of inaction when faced with the raging fires. Other accusations are aimed at real estate developers. The press suspects that they were behind these fires and were speculating on the land.
The BBC covered a Palestinian protest against Hamas in Gaza that took the form of prayer.
This is the biggest show of opposition to Hamas in Gaza since the Islamist movement violently seized power of the territory. The main weekly prayers for Muslims became the focal point for protests. Thousands of supporters of rival factions organized prayers in public areas, saying Hamas was using the mosques to spread political propaganda. The prayer meetings then turned into rallies, defying a Hamas ban on public gatherings. In recent weeks, Hamas has been accused of crushing opposition in Gaza through arrests and the use of force. Opponents of the party are beginning to grow in confidence again and are making their voice heard.
The Iranian English-language news programs IRIB and Press TV are paying attention to anti-globalization protests in Australia.
Australian Prime Minister John Howard has posted a video on YouTube appealing for peaceful protests at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Sydney.
U.S. President George W. Bush arrived for the APEC summit in Sydney, where authorities have locked down the city in the biggest security operation in the Australian history. 4 days ahead of the summit, anti-war groups staged a small unwelcoming ceremony in Sydney to protest the arrival of the U.S. president and to kick off a series of protests culminating in a march by up to 20,000 people on Saturday.
Al Jazeera English reports on what is at risk for protesters in Myanmar.
Up to 20 people have reportedly been arrested in the Myanmar main city of Yangon after another day of street protests.
Unrest in Myanmar has risen sharply in the past 2 weeks, with almost daily protests. They've been sparked by fuel price rises of up to 500% and a sharp increase in the price of other goods. The move means some people can no longer afford bus fare to work. Some analysts believe the government's run out of money, with tax revenues plunging due to a mismanaged economy. The military has ruled Myanmar since 1962. Student leaders have seized the chance to galvanise opposition to the military, but could still only muster about 30 people brave enough to take to the streets. Government newspapers say the arrested protesters will be charged under an internal security law carrying a jail term of up to 20 years. The protests may be increasing, but the response remains the same.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only US network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.